Welcome to Keats House and talk on the Spanish Keats, and this is part of our Keats House 100, one of our Keats House 100 events, because Keats House opened on the 9th of May 1925. Slightly over 100 years. It's been a museum for the public. Just to remind you that your tickets allow you to look around the house after the event. So for this great talk, which will last until about 4:45, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rafael Cruz, and our special guest from the embassy, the cultural counsellor, who is Jose Maria Robles Fraga. And I hope you enjoy the talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If you'd like to give a round.
Well, we are very honored to have Jose Maria Robles, the Councillor of the Spanish Embassy. Thank you for coming. And he's going to start by telling us some words opening. But first of all,
Sorry, could you speak up a bit? We're at the back.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
We're very honored to have Mr. Jose Maria Robles here with us, who is the Councillor of the Culture Councillor of the Spanish Embassy here in London. And he's going to say some words to open the event. The event is going to go like this. Jose Maria Robles is going to give us some words. Then I will do a presentation on the topic of the day, which is the Spanish Keats, which is basically a journey through the legacy of Fanny Keats, the younger and only sister of the poet who married a Spaniard, and that's the Spanish connection. Then we will have a short video by the Fanny Keats' great-great-great-grandchild, who wanted to be here today, but sadly his health is not very good, and he has sent us a video with some words about his connection with the Keats legacy. But we have Richard Paradinas here, who is actually Guillermo's nephew, and also obviously a descendant of Fanny, and we're going to have a few words with him here as well about this Spanish Keats legacy, how he lived it. And after that, and to finish, I will read, because I am a publisher of poetry in translation, and one of the books I translated and published is called Keats Now, which it's translated into Spanish, a selection, an anthology of the poems of the great Romantic poet. And I will read the Ode to the Nightingale. Well, my husband, John Rogers, who is here, is going to read the original in English, and I'm going to read my translation in Spanish for this Spanish-English thing, which is the topic of the day. Yeah. So, Jose Maria, would you like to start?
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor. Do you hear me?
Yes,
the guys in the back paid less money than the guys in the first row, but I will try to talk to you too. So, the legacy is not because we are next to Spaniards Inn. He will explain that later. The story goes that fascinating character named Valentin Llanos, who had studied at the Real Colegio de los Ingleses of Valladolid, the Royal College of St. Albans in Valladolid, created by Philip II to form Catholic priests, English Catholic priests. He studied there, he learned English, he fought in the Spanish War of Independence, or the Peninsular War, as you call it. And then, being very liberal, which was a word invented in that moment by the Spanish during the Spanish political debate, liberals were opposed to absolutists. They were the progressives against the conservatives in those days. And being from a family related to trade, he traveled. He went out of Spain. And he met Keats in the days before he died. So he had and then he came to England, like many other liberals, and he was the great part of the community of Spanish emigres in London, around Somerstown. There was 1,000 families, more or less. They had a pension, some of them from the English government, but most of them wrote books, grammars, they had bookshops, they had papers, and some of them were in the business of importing Spanish wines. I mean, they were a very lively and active community, and they kept in politics, so that when finally the king, the absolutist king of Spain, Ferdinand VII, died in 1833, they came back to Spain, and they were the part of the group that made the liberal revolution in the first half of the 19th century and created the basis of a new Spain. With important roles. Valentin Llanos was a member of parliament. He was, he had different. He was consul. He had different, positions. But most importantly, was the private secretary of the Juan Álvarez de Mendizábal, became prime minister, and he's one of the great reformers of the Spanish 19th century. A very interesting character. Which would probably merit another conference, but not this one. So I will spare you the guy. But he worked for a very important politician. He traveled abroad. Valentin and his wife traveled back out of Spain, but they lived and died in Madrid, and they're buried there. And that's where they created the only family that Keats had, which is the family of Fanny. So that's why we have this legacy of this trail of documents that I'm very happy to know that they have been sent back here, and they are part of this amazing institution. And I'm very proud of representing my embassy in my country in this event, talking about this great community that not just influenced our political life, but was part of the life of London in those 10 years, more or less, that they lived and worked in this capital. So thank you very much for coming. I hope the tickets included my speech. If not, we'll have to give me some money later. But thank you very much. Thank you, Rafael, and congratulations for the book and for the
Thank you, Jose Maria. Really very honored that you are here. And I don't take my hat because it's a prop, okay? I'm an actor, and this is my prop, so you can tell who I am because I've got a hat, okay? I've got my hat myself. So, the Spanish Keats, a journey through the legacy of Fanny Keats. We're going to start by saying that in the last letter that Keats, which is not this one, this is another letter, the last letter wasn't written to Fanny because he was very ill. It was written, dictated to Severn, who was the guy who was taking care of Keats in Rome. And he dictated a letter that said that he was thinking of his little sister Fanny, who was so like the brother Tom that he had nursed to death there some years before, the same illness he was having. And he said, my sister Fanny, who is in my mind like a ghost, so like Tom. So one of the last thoughts of Keats was of Fanny, and Fanny has remained a bit of a ghost in the general narrative of Keats' life. George, his brother in America, has been more famous for obvious reasons because he was older and they had a very intense correspondence that is the base of a lot of the philology, the studies of Keats' poetics that are based on those letters, which we all know they are one of the best examples of literary correspondence ever, the example of. So she has remained like a ghost of, this is Keats, supposedly, because we can never be sure if Keats is Keats, because there have been so many versions. But apparently this is the one that Fanny Keats said, is by Severn, that was most like him. This is Fanny, painted by her son Juan, who was a very good painter. And this is the portrait that you can see in Keats' house, and there's another copy because he did several, and there are copies of the copies as well, by another one by the grandchild of Fanny and Valentin, who was also a very, very good painter. I'm going to talk about her in a moment. So this is Fanny Keats, and we're going to go into... There is an address in Madrid, this one. It's in Calle Lista, number 5. But Calle Lista doesn't exist anymore. It was changed to Calle Ortega y Gasset. Ortega y Gasset is a very Spanish philosopher, died in 1955, and they changed the name of the street. However, there is a metro station that has not changed, that is still called Lista, passing to everybody. So you're privy to that now. Why Lista Metro? Because it used to be Calle Lista until 1955. So there is this address. This is where they lived. There was no lift then. There is lift now, but not before, because the house is still standing. This is photos from last year. So they lived on the 4th floor, and there was no lift. And she lived until she was 85. So imagine, climbing those stairs. But she was very, very, very sturdy lady, very resilient. They lived there very happy, all the family. That means the 4 surviving children, 1 spouse, and a multitude, I think it was 7 grandchildren. There were actually 2 flats communicating, because they fell on hard times at some point. Not hard times, I mean, this is a very rich part of Madrid. But they joined households. This is the entrance, so it's very elegant, very elegant. And there's a bed in the flat. This is Fanny Keats and Valentin Llanos. The photo is courtesy of Guillermo Paladinas Brockman, who is going to talk in the video later. I've been very privileged to have access to the archive they have in the most unlikely of places. In a village in Avila, called El Barco de Avila, they have a treasure trove of things. This is next to their bed. The great-great-great-grandmother Fanny Keats. In case you want to go to Madrid, it's here. It's, hold on, this is the street, okay? And it's very near Paseo de la Castellana. So it's a very, very elegant, it's like Mayfair or, you know, something like that in Madrid. It's a 19th century elegant. So they were quite wealthy. That's the street. This is Paseo de la Castellana, which is the main avenue in Madrid, and that's the 3rd building, number 5 of the Gasset. So we can say that there's an address in Madrid that will be forever in there, forever Keats. So, Fanny Keats would be horrified that we're talking about her today. She was a very private person. She was very shy. She was very sturdy, as I say, but she didn't like publicity. She was a very private person, very fond of the family. And she was very happy to be forgotten. She was very happy to be a ghost. It wasn't to be, but that was against her wishes. This is Valentin Llanos, her husband, and this is the reason why the Spanish Keats. Valentin Llanos was the son of a very wealthy landowner and investor, merchant of Valladolid. And like Jose Maria, our guest today, our luxury guest, has said, he went to an English school there, very famous school, and he learned perfect English as a native. And he also developed liberal ideas. At the time, you know, we're talking about Napoleon times, we're talking about in the whole of Europe, there was a battle of ideas between the conservatives and the liberals. And he was a young person, and he sided with the liberals, with the modernity, with, you know. And after the war, the Peninsular War, which we call Guerra de Independencia, sadly for the liberals, the king, el deseado, Ferdinand III, sorry, Ferdinand VII, sorry, Ferdinand is the one that took it. Ferdinand VII, Fernando VII, he was restored. And with him was restored everything, from the Inquisition to anything that was retrograde and anti-Napoleon, anti-French Revolution. So he saw fit to make himself scarce and leave Spain. So he went into exile voluntarily, and his exile was not the exile of other people with less means. He was rich, and he traveled through Europe in style, learning to dance, learning the ways of the world. He was very handsome, very charming, and he traveled through France, through Italy, and that's when he met Keats. He was in Rome that winter, and he became friends with Severn, the guy, the painter, a friend that was taking care of Keats at the time in Rome. And of course he was invited, and he was with Keats 3 days. We've got some letter from some playwright, I don't remember the name now, obscure British playwright, but in his letter to somebody he says, and Keats was, and my friend Valentin Llanos was with Keats 3 days before he died. So this is not made up, you know, there are evidence. But obviously they must have had connections. But Fanny was not really that, didn't have chances to become very close to him. She was very close to the brother, but the age difference and the fact that their parents died when they were very young, this is the plaque that there is in Moorgate now, very near the tube, that says the place with the Swan and Hoop, which is a pub that belonged to the Keats' grandparents, the Jennings. And this is the house where they lived with the family, but it was very short-lived because his father, I'm not going to go on that because you probably know that, and it's not the Spanish Keats, it's the English Keats. But he died in a freak accident, fell off the horse outside the cemetery in Moorgate. Was it called? Bunhill Fields, there you are. Okay, and they were sent to leafy Edmonton, where there Fanny lived with the Jennings' grandmother. Keats lived there as well, but they were older and he was in boarding school, so they weren't living together. Really, they were only on holidays and that. And the age difference was important. So they lived in Edmonton, but then Granny Jennings, I'm going very quickly through this because this is common ground of Keats' life. I will not talk about Fanny in Spain. No? And she was buried alive in Walthamstow. Because when the grandmother died, the custody and all the money was given to a guy called Abi, who is the villain in the Keats story, because he was a very Victorian, uptight, very Dickensian character that didn't agree with poetry, wasting money. He wanted everybody to do something businesslike. He sent George to business. He apprenticed John Keats, our poet, as a doctor. And then Keats gave up medicine for poetry, and you can imagine for a Victorian gentleman of that persuasion, that was just like horror. And tried not to give any money. And more importantly, tried to prevent him from seeing Fanny. In fact, for a while, he didn't allow them to correspond. And Keats had to confront him and say, "Excuse me, it's my sister, it's my money," and they had a very strong confrontation. And then he was allowed to write to Fanny, and that's why we have 148, 48 or 44, 140, I've got it written down somewhere. I think it's 144 letters between, 48 letters, 48 letters that sent from John Keats to Fanny in Walthamstow. And those letters were kept all her life by Fanny. So that's how committed she was to the memory of the brother. So she was buried alive there until he died, and the life of Fanny starts in a way when he dies. So that's why I'm not going to go through the common, because that's not the topic of today's talk. This is Fanny Braun, who lived in this place on the other side. You know? This one didn't exist, this is from there, but we know that. Keats dictated a letter to Fanny Braun, for Fanny Keats, before he went to Italy. And that's how they two got to know each other. And when he died, she is fantastic. She stormed the citadel of Mr. Abbey in Walthamstow and took her away, and took her dancing. And they talk about clothes, and took her to art galleries and music concerts. Fanny Braun has a reputation of being frivolous, but hey, that was men in Victorian time. She was a girl, an intelligent, bright girl that liked clothes, partying, men. She was young, she was beautiful, and she thought it was very terrible that Fanny Keats had been kept almost like a prisoner, and she was. So that is when when the life of Fanny Keats really begins, because before she'd been like a kid, a prisoner almost in Walthamstow. There are 32 letters between Fanny Braun and Fanny Keats between 1824 and 1830, I think. And those letters present a portrait of Fanny Braun very different from the one that had come through the history of construction as a frivolous character. She actually loved Keats, that's very clear. She was just a happy-go-lucky sort of girl, you know, and she suffered a lot. So that's why she became very good friends with Fanny. And the two of them, when partying, they talk about his brother, who was by then buried in Rome. That's actually is here, somewhere in one of the exhibits. That's a silhouette, as they did in Victorian times. They went dancing, they went to pleasure gardens, they wrote about trivialities, they wrote about clothes, they wrote about men, they wrote about... It's beautiful, the correspondence between the two girls. Really, it's something very, very endearing. And then this man arrives. This is Valentin Llanos. Valentin Llanos, after the death of Keats, that winter, the year, he died in February, so it was the winter later, that year he came back to Britain, presumably with letters of introduction to Fanny Braun and Fanny Keats. And he came back to London, and the two girls were absolutely crazy for him, the two of them. Sorry, that's the marriage certificate. The thing is, yeah, no, there are, in the letters, one of the things is to see how it worked, the relation between the two of them. And Fanny Keats was learning the harp, and she gave up learning the harp to learn Spanish guitar. Fanny Keats wrote to George in America, her brother, a letter in which she said, I've got lots of notes, but I'm improvising. I know the story well, so hopefully, yeah. Yes, yeah. It says, she wrote to, at this time, she wrote and said, my dear brother, says, do I look like a Spanish lady? In a letter. And he replies, your face is decidedly not Spanish, but English all over. If I fancied you to resemble Don Quixote, I should fancy a handsome, intelligent, melancholy countenance with something like a benevolent glint about the eyes. This was in 1824. One can easily assume that this interest in all things Spanish was because of Mr. Valentin Llanos Gutiérrez, because we have two surnames, like Rafael Peñas Cruz, no? And they didn't know which name to use, and it's very famous that Fanny Braun in the letters always misspelled the name and say Gutierrez, instead of Gutierrez, Guterres, Mr. Guterres. So Mr. Guterres was the reason why they became all so head over head about everything in Spanish, you know. They read Don Quixote, and imagine these two girls suddenly, you know, the reasons why they were really good friends, you know. And they both loved him. He was a very good dancer. He was very elegant. He was rich. He was the spirit of all parties. So they married. She married eventually. In 1924, the guardianship of Mr. Abbey finished because she came of age. She was 21, and she became free and rich because she had the money of the grandmother Jennings, and because Keats had died, and because Tom had died sadly, she got the part of the money that was for them, apart from a lot of money that had been set aside for her by the grandmother, that she would only get, I mean, it was invested, so it was a lot of money that came through investment that the grandmother had planned for her grandchildren. So she was very independent, and the first thing she did was go to dancing classes to learn quadrilles. It was fashionable there. So, and the quadrilles must have worked because she moved to Chelsea. She left Walthamstow forever, and she moved to Chelsea with a friend, and they married in Chelsea. This is the wedding certificate, which I have a copy through Mr. Paradinas in Avila. So this is Francis Keats, Valentin Llanos, and it's 1826. They married. They married and they go to Paris, because remember, he was a man of the law. So can you imagine this lady who has been locked up in Walthamstow, suddenly married to this handsome gentleman, foreign, perfect English, but you know, this kind of, and taken to Paris. And they lived there for a while. The first child was born in Paris, and they must have lived for a while there. We've got some documents that have come to me by a Richard, that there's a passport of at the time, which I didn't see before this talk, so, but there is the passport that he was given to travel to France and to Holland. You know? So they must have been to Holland, but other than this passport that you have, nobody knew that. I've been researching, and
There's
Maria,
probably a lot
I mean,
more documentation as well. We have to translate it. And,
there's a lot of
I can show you
documents.
my
What I'm saying is that
documents
if you're interested, there's a lot of things to study, you know, areas of research about this. You know. The next thing we know about this, is that they are back in this house. They, their first, well, he appears in the lease hall of this side of the house where Keats had lived with Brown, his friend, and they took the lease of this house. And on the other half was still Fanny Brown with her mother and the sister, who was a widow by then. And yeah, they moved here, and their second child was born here as well. Yes, in 1830, I think. Anyway, they live here, and why they were here is when his literary career starts. Valentin Llanos, because he wrote perfect English, wanted to be to emulate Walter Scott, and he became the father of the Spanish. Although he wrote in English, but he is the first Spaniard to write historical novel. A young writer later, as Galdós, many of the best Spanish writers of the 19th century would develop. But he started in 1826, 1827, 1829 to write historical novels. They are fantastic, actually. They were not successful. He wanted to make as much money as Walter Scott, but he didn't. Although the novels were well received by the press, they were not so by the people. I think that maybe they were not ready for, because his novels were based on this liberal, this is Somerstown, that Jose Maria was telling us before, there were 100 Spanish families, liberal families, living here, exiled from the absolutism restoration of Ferdinand VII in Spain. So they were successful because the novels create heroes of the liberals. It's all about the liberals against the conservatives in contemporary Spain. Contemporary Spain for them, obviously. So he was successful, but he didn't do the crossover into the main Spanish English market, even though he had connections, very good connections with. He was reviewed in the Athenaeum, but it didn't translate into sales. So by this time, they were getting a bit. This is Sandoval, his second novel. And this is one, El Español Expatriado, which has not, it's the only one in Spanish, and it's never been published. I know it was published in Spain recently by the, yeah, I know the person that curated this, very, very recently by the Diputación of Zaragoza, by the way, and it's been published for the first time, El Español Expatriado. But until 4 or 5 years ago, it was not published. They're great fun, the novel. I love them. I mean, they're a bit of the talk. They're very kind of mixing history, real history, with political, fanciful, attacks that are not necessarily, they're not historical. You cannot follow history. Use them as documents. Let's put it like that. They're very fanciful, but they're great fun, and there's a lot of truth in the novels. Okay. The only thing is that they don't withstand the test of true history. He wrote what he wanted to write, which was his political message. Okay. Very, very political man he was. While they were living here, this is the room next door, something tragic happened as well. Is that the mother of Fanny Brown, her dress caught fire while she was saying goodbye to some guests, and she died. They couldn't put the fire out. And Fanny Brown and her sister Margaret couldn't afford the lease once they were orphans. So Fanny Brown moved with the Llanuses here to this house. And in this room was born the second son of Valentin and Fanny. And the house was a bit crowded because there were 2 kids. It's not very big, as you know. There were 2 kids. She was pregnant again, Fanny, for the third. They had Fanny Brown with them. Fanny Brown met a man, a banker, a Jewish banker, Mr. Lindon or London, because he was French, and apparently that put some distance in with the 2 girls, because I think that the thing is that Fanny Keats and Fanny Brown had said that she would never marry anybody. She loved the brother. They were young and romantic, but reality imposed itself, and of course. Fanny Keats is the cat that got the cream, the handsome Spaniard, the rich and all that, and the other one, what? So the other one found herself a banker. But apparently that was something that broke somehow their friendship. And at the same time, all this is happening, the novels don't work, the distance with Fanny Brown, who is living with them, the house is too small. Valentin Llanos invested a lot of the money that Fanny had inherited into some scheme of something that didn't work out, and then they were kind of almost ruined. So, what to do? Go to Spain, what they studied. And they did go to Spain. They crossed France, they went to Paris, they took it easy, they went to the border, and Fanny arrives in Valladolid. And for the first time in her life, she's living in true wealth, because these people were serious money. They really had lots of servants. Es Castile in 1830. It's the etiquette is very different from the English. This is really almost not quite, but it's this black people dressed in black, very Catholic, very, very Castilian, very rigorous compared to the life of parties that she had been in lately in London and Paris and all that. However, it is to her credit that she immediately adapted. She learned Spanish, She didn't have a problem with the in-laws. She was fantastic. You know, she adapted as if she was a Spaniard. That is what all the family that were later interviewed said, that she became Spanish. She didn't have a problem. She married, she had children, and they were Spanish. And although she spoke in English with them, Spanish was the language of the house, because it was the language. I mean, English was a bit of an eccentricity for them, you know. But mother is English, but everything was Spanish, you know. They were a family in the middle of the, you know, the society of Spain. So the Englishness, contrary to what it may seem, you know, like it was an asset, for them it was like an oddity, you know. You have to think that the context of politics between Spain and England is tricky, you know, it's always been tricky. And they are there at the center of it. We're going to see this through the presentation. So, in 1834, this Isabel II, our Elizabeth II, restores liberalism. The thing is that she came to the throne, she was the daughter of the horrible Ferdinand VII, who was the absolutist monarch. But she wasn't, he had to change the law, because the law in Spain said that only the male heir could be the heir, otherwise the throne would go to the brother of the king. And he changed the law before he died, so his daughter, which is very interesting, very conservative, right, when it comes to giving the throne to somebody else, even his brother, he rather changed the law and gave the throne to Elizabeth. Isabel II was hated by the conservatives because of that. So there was, immediately she had to pact with the liberals and had to pact with this man, Mendizábal, who is the prime minister that had been in exile in Somerstown in London, very good friend of Valentin, and made him the secretary, his secretary. So he became the secretary of the Prime Minister of Spain, Valentin Llanos. He was deputy in the Cortes of Spain by the province of Valladolid. He was suddenly a very important person. Mendizábal is very famous for what José María said, one of the liberal economic reforms that defined Spain in the 19th century. Spain had lost the colonies and the economy was in ruins, and they needed to inject capital. And they thought, well, he was a very clever man, and he was los ilustrados, the enlightened, you know, comes from Goya, and people who were they knew what had to be done. And the conservatives didn't want to do it. But when he took power, he confiscated the land of the church that wasn't producing anything, and sold it in auction. And this kick-started the economy, because a lot of bourgeois who had money they had made money from commerce, trade, they could invest in land and make the land productive. So it's a defining moment in the Spanish economy. And he was the secretary of this man, and he also was privy to inside knowledge, so he invested in those properties that were sold in auction. So he was even more rich than he had been before he became the secretary of the Prime Minister. That's a surprise. So he did invest very well at this time, and they made a lot of money. But the politics of Spain are very difficult, and there was a revolution, and they fell from grace, and Mendizábal was ousted from power, and there was a conservative 2-year. And then this man, who is General Espartero, restored the liberal constitution, and he was a friend of our Valentin Llanos. So he made him consul to Gibraltar. So Fanny Keats and her husband moved to Gibraltar as consuls of Spain in Gibraltar. Obvious, they spoke English. And they spent there 4 happy years in Gibraltar as consuls. Because for Fanny it must have been very interesting. There's no record of any letters of her that have survived at the moment that describes her experience, but for her it was the first time she was going to a place where English was spoken after 17 years of Spanish life, you know, by then. So they lived in Gibraltar, which is a very interesting angle. As I say, they are always in the middle of the politics of Spain and Europe. There's a revolution against Espartero, and comes the conservatives again, and he loses the consulship. But it doesn't matter, because the father dies, and all the money comes, everything comes. Well, there were 12 brothers, but there was so much money that he became amazingly wealthy. And they moved to Valladolid, and they buy a huge house, and Fanny Keats, you remember the origins of pub owners that they were in London, where she grew up, and then an orphan, and then Mr. Abbey, the Dickensian man. Suddenly she is the queen of a huge house with lots of servants, summers in San Sebastian, in the mountains, you know, carriages, 2 carriages, I don't know how many horses. She is happy, and also they have a huge house outside the town, and she's got all the children with her. They've got another child born in Gibraltar, where they were in Gibraltar, and the last and 5th child, which was Isabel, born in Valladolid at this time, and she becomes a lovely mother, really, really beautiful mother, that very liberal. She wants all the family together, because her family was destroyed by the death of the parents, and she was very acutely missing all the family, the brothers, so she decided to keep all her children with her, and she was going to be a matriarch, and she was loved by everybody. And out of her children, and Valentin becomes it's interesting, this data, also the head of the Canales de Castilla, an big engineering enterprise which is building canals for irrigation around Castilla, and he becomes the head of it. So he's rich, he's got lands, he's got the money of the father, he's got this salary, he's a deputy in the Cortes. So imagine the life of Fanny Keats, you know, unheard of. She never thought of coming back to Britain, apparently. This is Rosa Llanos, one of the daughters. She was a very accomplished musician, so she was given studies of music. And I've heard today in the pub with Richard that the piano that we're going to see in the pictures, and we've seen already, it was the piano where Liszt played, and it was purchased so that the girl would learn to play the piano. So there you go. This is Isabel. Isabel, all these paintings are in the family in Ávila. This is Isabel Llanos Keats, so it's the daughter of Fanny Keats, and she married a man that is going to take us to the next step of the Spanish Keats. This is a painter by Juan Llanos. Juan is a painter. I couldn't find any image of him before today, but I will show you the image later. So when I did the PowerPoint, this is La Inmaculada. He wanted to be a painter, therefore the parents, Valentin and Fanny, sent him to the Prado to learn from the masters. They paid anything they had to pay for him to learn to be a painter. They set him a practice in Madrid, so he became an established painter. But he never married. Rosa never married. They all kept by Fanny, all of them. This is Luis. Luis is an interesting person. Luis is the youngest of the family, the younger brother, and he became a painter as well, although he was a diplomat as well. He was ambassador of Spain in the newly created Republic of Colombia, but he died in Colombia. He's buried in Colombia. Fanny Keats' child. So to see how it spreads, what I mean is like how this family, from Keats, from here, from this, how it spreads all over the world. But he's very famous, not so much for being the ambassador, but being a painter of landscape. He is one of the great landscape painters. He created the Colombian School of Landscape Painting. And he lived in Colombia the rest of his life, and he became a very famous painter. This is the husband of Isabel, Leopoldo Brockmann. Brockmann is a German surname, but they were from El Puerto de Santa Maria in Greece, because they were importers of wine, of sherry wine, from El Puerto, from sherry to Germany. So they had been for generations. So it's not a German. He didn't speak German basically. They were Spanish, but of German origin, because they had settled, and they were very wealthy with this import-export of the Spanish wines. But he became an engineer, and a top engineer, a railway engineer. In the middle of the 19th century, you can imagine, the railways is a great investment, a great development. It's like now artificial intelligence or whatever, or computers. In those days was the railway, you know, great opportunities, a lot of investment, a lot of money. And he was an excellent engineer, together with the Echegaray. Echegaray is a very famous, one of the most famous engineers. He was in the same practice, so they were top engineers for railway, and they created most of the railways of Andalusia in southern Spain. So good was he that he was hired by Pope Pius IX, Pio IX as it's called, to build the railways of what was then the Papal States, los Estados Pontificios. Again, they go to the heart of Europe because it's the unification of Italy is happening. It's the only part of Italy that's not unified. And 2 years after they leave Rome, they will it will become part of Italy. Okay, they will be unified. So imagine the fervent atmosphere. The whole family goes to Rome. All of them. They sold a house in Valladolid, and they bought a house or hired a house in Rome, and they all live there. All the Rosa, all the grandchildren, they are married, Valentin, very happily. But more importantly, Rome. Rome is where Keats is buried, of course, and Severn was there, nursing him to death. To death, he didn't kill him, but until he's there. And corresponding with Fanny. Can you imagine? And Fanny goes back to Rome. And Severn is the British consul in Rome. So they meet. And it's all very emotional. They go to the graveyard, and she plants some bay trees. They go very often. They stay there for 4 years, the family. And they become very, very good friends, Severn. And for her, it's like living with the brother that she had lost. They go visiting Rome. These photos, by the way, are in an album that was given to the Paradinas family, to Leopoldo Brockman, by Pio IX himself. Well, it's a big album of photos of Rome and the railway construction. So they went to the house where he died, and he was telling her stories, and she was living the life of his brother through Severn, those years. That is in her correspondence, and that is one of the most interesting aspects of this time. This is Pio IX in blessing the railways. This is Valentin, as you can see, very handsome still. He's in Rome. And this is the only photo, formal photo of Fanny, because she didn't like the picture taken. So she was cajoled into posing with some Roman antiquities in the background, obviously painted, and to be in full regalia like Queen Victoria. Fanny Keats, you know, she admired Queen Victoria. She loved. But the contract finished, the railway contract finished, and sadly they had to go back to somewhere. Obviously Spain was the first port, but no, there was Paris again. And Paris, because Leopoldo Brockman had a fantastic project with Mr. Echegaray, this top engineer, Spanish engineer, a crossing of the channel, a fixed cross of the channel, the Brother Channel, you know, from Dover to Calais. And it's a very fascinating project, and all the documentation is in the hands of the Paradinas family. And it's honestly, it's just quite something. This is it. Look, these are some wheels at the bottom of the channel, and there are three towers, and there is that kind of like railway bridge, and with steam, this moves. So the train arrives in Calais, this moves with the wheels, the train enters the bridge, gets to Dover, and the train goes. Well, you may laugh, but it works. It was just too expensive. But the studies are serious. Everything has been considered. They were the best engineers of the time, you know, and it's feasible. It's just too expensive, but it was feasible. Oh, and there was also politics. I mean, this was presented to Napoleon III, and Napoleon III, by 1870, was in a very good condition, was he? It was the Franco-Prussian War. There were a lot of concerns, and this was a lot of money. So but the study itself is amazing. I have been a privileged person to see this. It's just beautiful. But he's back to Madrid. Sorry, it didn't work out. So they go back to Madrid, and to Fanny's horror, he wants to invest in business again. Horror of horror. And they all invest all the money into some sort of business that didn't work because, hooray, hooray, there was another revolution. 1873 is the first Spanish Republic, and the stock exchange fell, and everything collapsed, and they were caught in this ruinous business. So, in the middle of this, Leopoldo, the engineer, who had gone back to building railways in Andalusia, died unexpectedly of disease, leaving Isabel Llanos Keats with 7 children from the ages of 3 to 12, I think, and no capital. Obviously he had his salary and that, but there was no capital because he had lost all the capital in the investment. He put the investments in Valentin's failed scheme. So hard times, I mean, they had money obviously, but they didn't have money enough to live the style that a family of their standing was used to, no? But Fanny immediately said, no, let me sort this out. And she did. Valentin, from then on, stops being the head of the family, and she takes the reins. It's her that, back in Calle Vista, like I said, she hires the 2 flats. She says, instead of living you here, and paying household, we live together, only one servant, you need servants in those days, only one cook, only one only one household, basically, with all the savings. So she's happy. She's very happy, because for the first time, she's in control, she's got all her kids around her, and she saved the family. And the only thing that disturbs her is that her brother fame is growing. She knew this was happening, because in Rome, she talked to the caretaker of the graveyard, and he said a lot of Americans come here to visit them. And in fact, the headstone collapsed and it was paid by some American. So she knew this was happening, but she thought she could, okay, but I can go back to Madrid and nobody thinks of me. But she had put herself in a position via Severn. Severn was the consul of Britain in Rome, so Keats was very famous. So he said, and you know what, the sister is in Madrid. Lots of letters starts calling to Madrid. Everybody wants to meet the sister. Everybody wants the letters. The letters. Because, kids, can you imagine? It's like, a fetish. Everybody wants that, but they also want to know what is in the letters. They want to know about the poetry. Who was this Keats who died, ignore the name, whose name was written in water and all that, Articles in the New York Times. And whose grave is this? Fanny Bron. Fanny Bron married to Louis Landon, who lived in France, the French Jewish banker. She is buried in Brompton Cemetery. She died, and her children sold the letters of Keats to Fanny Bron in auction, and they were published. And Fanny was horrified because she thought it was too private, something too private and being given to the world. She didn't agree with that. She would never sell her letters, she said. She didn't approve of that, But the news obviously came to her because it was a big thing, the letters of Fanny. And this is why Fanny Bron comes as very frivolous, because the letters of John Keats to Fanny Bron, John was always telling her off. Don't go to parties, because he was jealous. He was a bloody, young man who didn't want, the girl to be but she was very independent, and she loved partying and dancing, and all the letters are always telling her off for that. And this is the legend that she was frivolous, not up to be the partner of such a great mind, and that is going to be totally disproved by the letters that Fanny has. So I'm here to present you the Fanny Keats as actually the savior of Fanny Brown's reputation eventually. So the thing is that they, in the middle of all this, they die. Valentine dies in 1885, and she dies 4 years later, 1889. And then what happens? Is Fanny Keats is quite something. If you go to Madrid, go to the San Isidro. I was emotional when I saw it. I thought, oh my God, there's a part of Keats here, you know. And actually, I remember I found Guillermo, the great grandchild, and I say, Guillermo, I can't find the grave. and so, no, I didn't find Guillermo. I found the person in the graveyard. I said, Guillermo, sorry, I'm looking for a grave, Francis Keats. He said, Francisca. Francisca in Spanish, this woman there, and I said, oh yes, must be her. Is usted familia? Are you family? And he goes, yes and no. Why? And she says, because you haven't paid the quotas. You haven't paid the quotas for 4 years or 5 years, I don't know how many years. And digo, bueno, pues espera, digo, mire, es que yo vivo en Londres, digo, I live in London, and I am the family in Madrid, I will contact them and they will contact them. And then I found Guillermo, mira Guillermo, I'm in the graveyard and you haven't paid. He says, and that, no, because before I hang with the civil servant, she says, I asked her, that means that we can still bury people. We can still bury people in the grave. She said, sí, pero tiene que pagar las cuotas. Es Almodóvar total. You have to pay for the quotas. She said, no, we will pay them. So I told Guillermo that, and he immediately contacted the cemetery and paid for the quotas, and they can bury more people in that. No? So that's my claim to fame in all this story. No? It was very, very funny, very Almodóvar, as I say. So this is the cemetery. That's the view of Madrid. You can see the palace, the royal palace, which is out of the picture. This is here. It's a very moving place actually. I like it. So what happens after? I'm going to finish soon and have and talk with the real family here because I've been putting together this with documents from Maria Dami, a writer. This is Rosa, the one we've seen in the picture before, and this is Juan, the painter. This is the photo that I was given by Richard just 2 days ago. So this is a story in the making. And this is in the flat, the same flat in Calle Lista, and the piano. It's the same piano as in the previous picture, and it's the piano where Liszt played and which was purchased for Rosa. And look at that, that's funny. So this is in that famous flat. Basically, she's the only one that speaks English fluently by this time, Rosa. Music, Buria, I suppose. She speaks English. So they give all the dealings to Rosa. The first thing they do as a family is to give all the letters to the British Museum. They are in the British Museum. But there are the letters of Fanny Brown to Fanny Keats. And there are 3 letters that Fanny Keats kept for herself because they were emotional. One is a letter John Keats wrote to her about her confirmation with the Church of England. No? And in this confirmation letter, he goes one by one for all the points that she's going to be asked of liturgy or theology, and the answers. Imagine John Keats writing the answers you have to give to the confirmation. So I can see why she wanted to keep that letter, because it meant to her that he cared for her, that he went to all these lengths to tell the liturgy that he didn't particularly care for. He found it in books and things, put it together, the wrong letter. She kept that letter, she kept another letter, and she kept 2 more letters. And those letters were never given to the British Museum, not given to anybody. And but the number of letters was known. There were 48 letters, and there were 3 missing. And when she died, when she went to Spain, she had 48 letters from John to herself, 31 letters from Fanny to herself, miscellaneous correspondence, including letters from, you know, the brother in America, publishers, a lock of John's hair, editions of John's works given to her by himself, signed, in fact, several books, knowing things. Many of those things disappeared because Rosa brought the things of value, the letters were given, okay? The letters of Fanny Brown, there was a man called, let's go to, this is what, she accumulated more things, you know, that's what she brought to her from Britain to Spain. This is what she accumulated. Okay. And this man is Mr. Faraday. I'm terrible with names. I remember all the facts of the names. This guy is Hollanday, Mr. Hollanday, fabulous. A big homosexual curiosity. His picture, he's a photographer, is fabulous. Check him out in Wikipedia. His pictures are exquisite, you know, one of those kind of like, you know, very, very airy youngsters, almost naked, you know, that kind of Victorian photography. He's American, he's from Boston. And he is a fan of Keats. And before Fanny dies, he visits her. No, he writes to her and offers her a lot of documents he's got from the brother George in America. And she's very interested. And she says she's going to visit, but she dies. This is months before she dies. And then Rosa meets him and gave him the 32 letters of Fanny Brown to Fanny Keats. And he, the cat that goes the cream, we don't know what he does because those letters disappear until 1926, I think. No, 1916, when Amy Lowell, who is the biographer of Keats in America, hears of the letters, but doesn't see the letter. Sees copies of the letter, but doesn't see the letter, so it could have been fake. But she mentions them in her biography. When this guy dies, anonymously in this house arrives a parcel with letters, and copy of the letters given to the university in Harvard. And it's very strange, because there are conditions to these letters. One of the conditions is that it cannot be published. They cannot be published until 1962. This is 1926, I think, from the year I think the house opened. So they cannot be published until 1962. So there's a lot of saying, but who is this? Where is this coming from? Somehow there was a coming and going, and they were allowed to be published finally. And then is when the reputation of Fanny Brown was reinstated, because these letters, which are here, are really beautiful. And it shows that she was a spirited girl, but she loved Keats, and she was very serious about the love. No? And that had been unknown to the world, because the letters, Fanny had the letters. No? So, I'm going to go fast and finish. The next thing, we've got Maria Dami. Maria Dami is a lady that learns about Fanny Keats and wants, and this is the 1930s, and wants to write a biography. And she approaches Keats' house, which by then has been, for 10 years or so, since 2025. And she is sent by Keats' house to see if there are any relatives of Fanny still living in Madrid. And of course there are. Elena Brockman. Elena Brockman, this elegant lady, is living with her brother in the same flat in 1935, with the same paintings. Nothing has changed in that number 5, Calle Vista, today Ortega y Gasset. And Maria Dami interviews Elena Brockman. Elena Brockman is an excellent painter. She's got paintings in the Prado. She's got paintings. She's the first woman admitted in the Royal Academy of San Fernando, painting. So she's quite a lady, you know. But she is very nice to Maria Dami and gives Maria Dami everything that she's got for Keats' house. So it's when she comes with the 3 letters that Fanny Keats had kept. The confirmation letter had not been seen until then. And it's Maria Dami and the Paradina, because what is the name now of you?
Paradinas. My grandfather was Paradinas Brockman,
Yeah.
so his mother was her sister,
Right.
I think, in some way.
So I'm going to finish here because this is my part of the story, and we're getting late, okay? And we're going to have a little video. Can you play the video of Guillermo? I have a break and have a glass of water as well. Thank you very much. So yes, we're going to see the video of Guillermo, and the thing is that when I translated and published Keats Now, I learned about Fanny and I contacted the family in Avila. They received me fantastically. They invited me to, I've got a picture, I'll show you later, in which they said, we're going to open a bottle of champagne to Fanny. And they opened a bottle of excellent French champagne, but more importantly, with some beautiful champagne glasses. And these are the champagne glasses of Fanny Keats. You know. Oh my God! There we were, toasting in the middle of Avila with the glassware of Fanny Keats. You know. It's like, oh my God, I'm living the life. So this is Guillermo, the man that invited me to the champagne, with my husband, who's going to read that.
Buenas tardes a todos, me llamo José Guillermo Paradinas Brockman. En primer lugar, quiero comunicarles que mi intención era estar presente en el evento, pero motivos de salud me han impedido realizar el viaje a Londres. Valentín Llanos y Fanny Keats eran mis tatarabuelos, por tanto soy descendiente directo de Fanny por línea paterna. Este es el retrato de Valentín. Este es el retrato de Fanny. Fueron realizados por su hijo Juan hacia 1880. La casa de mis padres en Ávila estaba llena de cuadros y recuerdos familiares. Desde muy pequeño sentí la curiosidad de saber el por qué mi casa era así, a diferencia de las de mis amigos. Hago constar que hasta la 5ª generación, la mía, no ha habido nada más que una rama de descendencia, de modo que todo el legado ha llegado completo hasta mi padre. Se hablaba de los escritores y pintores que aparecían en los cuadros que veía todos los días y poco a poco descubrí lo que ellos significaban. Había unos libros, Don Esteban, el título en español y escritos en inglés por Valentín Llanos, que me llamaban la atención. Siendo algo mayor comprendí qué eran y por qué estaban en casa. Don Esteban, Sandoval, se puede apreciar que son obras en facsímil. Estas son las 2 novelas escritas y publicadas por Valentín. Escribió otra no publicada, El español expatriado, de la que existe un manuscrito en español en poder de la familia. Esto es el primer tomo. De Don Esteban se hizo una traducción al español, publicada en 2016. El libro de Adami sobre Fanny estaba en primera fila de la librería del cuarto de estar. Mi padre hablaba de su bisabuela con cariño en base a lo que le habían contado, ya que él no la conoció. Su bisabuelo, Valentín, fallece en 1885 y Fanny en 1889. Mi padre nace en 1907. El matrimonio está enterrado en la Sacramental de San Isidro, en Madrid. Esta es la sepultura. Creo que cuando realmente descubrí quién era el familiar de que se hablaba en casa, John Keats, Yo tenía solo 5 años. Era 1952, fecha en que mi padre viajó a Londres a la reapertura de la casa de Keats. Aquí tengo una fotografía de la portada de la casa, con mi padre. Acontecimiento que se comentaba como algo extraordinario, ya que la noticia aparecía en la prensa. Descubrí la existencia de libros de poesía y cartas cuyo autor era John Keats, ediciones traducidas al español. Un poco mayor, cuando empecé a darme cuenta de las cosas, me gustaba leer las cartas tan cariñosas que Keats escribía a las dos Fannys, su novia y su hermana. De aquel viaje, mi padre contaba el buen trato y la cantidad de gente importante que había conocido. Mi padre conoció a su abuela Isabel Llanos Keats, hija de Fanny, la quinta de sus 6 hijos, condesa de Brockman por su matrimonio con Leopoldo Brockman. Según contaba él, en la casa familiar de Madrid, calle Lista número 5, se hablaba lo mismo español que inglés, idiomas que también emplearon Valentín y Fanny. Esta es una fotografía de la casa de Lista 5. Al fondo se pueden ver los retratos realizados por Juan. Tengo entendido que la familia usaba los 2 idiomas hasta la siguiente generación. John Keats es poco conocido en España y en mi juventud solamente por los estudiosos. Gracias a Ángel Silvero y su obra literaria Los últimos pasos de John Keats, publicada en 2014 y presentada en Ávila ese mismo año, la presentación se anunció en medios de comunicación locales. Los abulenses conocieron la relación que había entre Keats y los Paradinas Brockman de Ávila. Sabían quién éramos nosotros y conocieron quién era John Keats. Como dije al principio, siento no poder estar presente en la casa de Keats, lugar que visité en la Navidad de 1987, presentado por mi hermano Fernando, fallecido en 2017, que residía en Londres, y acompañado de mi esposa. De haber estado, podría haberles conocido a ustedes y contestar posibles preguntas. Sin embargo, espero haya una representación familiar en la persona de mi sobrino Richard. Muchas gracias.
Richard, sorry to interrupt. Shall we be And we're going to have a little conversation. Are you happy standing or we sit down?
I'm good
I
standing.
think people see us more.
I have very little knowledge, so...
Well, but I would like to
But I do
take it,
have memories.
because I could tell the story, but you are here and your uncle is here, so I prefer that you tell. How did you leave this legacy as a
Well, like any normal kid, just kind of ignoring it and running around. I mean, so my father was Fernando, who José Guillermo referred to. So my grandfather, Ernesto Paulines Brockman, had 8 children. And in fact, he was mentioned in the book by Maria Dami as being a 30-year-old dentist in Ávila. And she visited, I think, with his aunt at the time, and he had 1 child and 1 on the way. So obviously then, I was born in '66, 30 years later, and I remember going to Ávila every year because my father married my mother, who's English, and so he is studying medicine in Madrid, and then he came over to England in, I think, very early 60s, and he became a doctor here.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Did he come because of the English connection in the family or unrelated?
No, he became because my mother refused to live in
Oh,
Spain.
right.
To be clear about that. So she met him in Spain, and she was working in a bank in Madrid, and she did a foreign exchange with with both of my dad's sisters. And she went to Ávila in the 1950s, and yeah, I think when it came to settling down, it was like, you know, you just do what she tells you kind of thing. So they came to live in England. My father had to, I think, study more medicine up in Edinburgh to kind
Can't
of...
hear.
Sorry.
Oh.
He had to study more medicine up in Edinburgh to become fully qualified here, and then he worked generally at Charing Cross but other hospitals. But they used to leave me every summer in Avila, where my grandfather's house was, and so I grew up English, but having that whole summer holiday every year, living with my Spanish family, and all the old aunts and uncles, and all the paintings around the house, and running around and just taking it for granted, really.
I suppose the flat in Calle Lista was not in the family hands.
No, I never visited that. I know there was one in Moncloa, where one of my aunts lived, but I think that was possibly on the other side of the family.
So did they have all these paintings in the house in Avila? Did you
All,
see those?
everything that José's
And there was there a painting of Keats? Was there a painting?
Yeah, there were the little miniatures, which I think were done by Valentin. I mean, now my brother his house is like a museum. He's got a lot of, because my father was he visited Keats' house many times, and he was in touch with Ken, I think, other people here, and he had a lot of paintings in the family and lots of documents, and because he spoke English perfectly, he could obviously understand the English ones as well. So there are a lot of letters still in the family, and my brother has most of them, so you're welcome, like I said, to come down.
Yeah. No, because when we were talking in the pub before we had a lunch, and we've got a bone to pick with Keats' house, because you said that the mask that was in the list that I didn't went long because we had taken a lot of time, you know. But there's a mask of Keats that was sent in 1952 when that photo that Guillermo was shown in the reopening of the house after the war, and they came from Madrid with a lot of things that they gave. You know, and one of them was a mask, a death mask, a copy of the death mask. It wasn't an authentic one. But according to the records of Keats' house, Ken sent me, is not the death mask of Keats, but of your uncle.
My grandfather's.
Your grandfather. Yeah. And I told Ken, excuse me, in Spain we don't do that. No, we don't do masks of dead people, sorry. It's morbid, nobody would do it. And I think it's very unlikely. I think this is probably a copy of the mask of Keats, so you check it out. I know, you've sent me the documents, but those documents don't tell you, because the documents are based on a mad woman, a woman that had losing her head at the time, the letter says, and cannot remember, and she thinks is this uncle of the brother of his grandfather. No? Anyway, I'm just saying that this is a work in progress. I'm not telling you, and we should investigate. But both Richard and I, we think that a death mask of his grandfather is very unlikely. Whose that mask is?
Also, that it was in the family, and I read in the Adami book that my great aunt had it, and her mother had it, and it was then given sort of in, around the 30s or the 40s, I thought, here. But anyway.
Anyway, we throw the gauntlet for scholars of this, that we disagree with.
This one came in the 50s.
From what you have sent me, I'm still skeptical, and I think it's very unlikely that that mask of a Spaniard was kept in a family. I've never heard of that, such a morbosity. I think it's very likely that it was a copy of the mask that was in the Keats. But we'll leave it here. We're going to finish here, and we're going to finish by reading the Ode to the Nightingale with my husband here. He's going to read the English. I think we need to... Oh, you want some water? Yes. So we're going to read the Ode to the Nightingale in the original and in Spanish, but so you can compare those who don't understand the Spanish. We're going to read stanza by stanza. It's on The book is for sale for £10, only £10. So if you want to buy the book, I've got a machine I can charge later, or you can give me a tenner. Well, why not? I'm a publisher, no? I'm supposed to be selling books. And it's a very good translation. And the prologue is in English and Spanish. The prologue, I spent hours, days, months writing it, and it tells a lot of things which you may. Anyway, I'm a shopkeeper, remember? I'm a publisher. Yes, I am. I also have Catalan. And you know what we are like. 157.
Now, come on.
I'm finding the page.
Page 156.
A stanza in English, and I read the Spanish. Stanza in English and Spanish. Okay, we do it like that.
Are we going to have a video?
Oh,
well, yes,
the
I'll
video,
take the video.
the video, yes.
Can I take a video, please?
You can take any videos that you like, yeah. And it's the Nightingale.
This, I can say, was recorded just 6 weeks ago in Arcadia, in Greece. A real nightingale. But this is, of course, by daylight. But the nightingale also sings at night, and that's the circumstance in which Keats wrote his poem. So, Ode to a Nightingale. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and Lethe woods had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beech and green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease.
Mi corazón se aflige, y un sopor me adormece los sentidos, como si cicuta hubiera bebido, o un opiáceo indolente me discurriera por las venas, hundiéndome poco a poco en las aguas del olvido. No es por envidia de tu feliz suerte, sino la felicidad de sumergirme en esa alegría que tú, dríada de alas ligeras, por los árboles derramas en melodiosa armonía de verde haya y sombras infinitas, anunciando a toda voz la llegada del verano.
Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and Provençal song and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple-stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim.
Oh, si pudiera dar un trago de vino de la mejor añada, enfriado por toda una eternidad en una tierra profundamente excavada, con sabor a flora y a prados verdes, a danzas y a cantos provenzales y a gozos por el sol bronceados. Oh, si tuviera una copa llena de la calidez del sur, llena de las aguas puras y sonrojadas de la fuente Hipocrene, rebosante de burbujas parpadeantes y con labios de púrpura manchados, para beber de ella y dejar el mundo inadvertido y perderme contigo en el bosque más oscuro.
Fade far away, dissolve, and quite forget what thou amongst the leaves hast never known. The weariness, the fever, and the fret, here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow.
Desvanecerme, disolverme y olvidar lo que tú ahí entre las hojas nunca has conocido. El cansancio, la fiebre y la inquietud, aquí donde los hombres se sientan a escuchar sus lamentos, donde los espasmos sacuden unas cuantas canas tristes y postreras, donde la juventud palidece, se debilita como un espectro y muere, donde pensar es hundirse en pesares y en desesperaciones de grisáceas pupilas, donde la belleza no puede mantener su brillante mirada, donde el amor nuevo no espera serlo más allá de mañana.
Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his paths, but on the viewless wings of poesy, though the dull brain perplexes and retards. Already with thee, tender is the night, and haply the Queen Moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry fays. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways.
Lejos, lejos de todo ello, hacia ti volaré, no en una carroza arrastrada por el séquito de Baco, sino en las invisibles alas de la poesía. Aunque el anestesiado cerebro vague extraviado, yo a ti ya te he alcanzado. Tierna es la noche. Y tal vez la luna reine allá en su trono, atendida por su cortejo de hadas fulgentes. Mas aquí no hay otra luz que aquella que del cielo traen las brisas que soplan por frondas umbrías y sinuosos senderos de musgo alfombrados.
I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming muskrose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves.
No veo qué flores hay a mis pies, ni qué suaves inciensos cuelgan de las ramas, pero en la oscuridad embalsamada adivino los dulces parabienes con los que cada estación dota a la hierba, la espesura y los agrestes árboles frutales, al blanco espino y a la rosa silvestre, las violetas cubiertas de hojas que se marchitan rápidamente, y a la hija mayor de mediados del mes de mayo, la rosa de almizcle perfumada llena de intoxicantes licores, donde murmuran insectos en atardeceres estivales.
Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a musing rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sob.
En la penumbra escucho, y durante muchos años he estado medio enamorado de la muerte reposada. La llamé con cariñosos nombres en infinidad de rimas meditadas, para que viniera a llevarse mi hálito sosegado. Ahora, más que nunca, morir me resulta grato. Expirar sin tormento a la medianoche mientras derramas tu alma por el mundo tan dichosamente. Aún querrías tú seguir cantando a mis oídos vanos, por tu alto requiem imperturbados.
Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the selfsame song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home she stood in tears amid the alien corn. The same that oft times hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn.
No naciste tú para la muerte ave inmortal. Ninguna hambrienta generación logrará derribarte. La voz que escucho esta noche fue escuchada en tiempos pasados tanto por el emperador como por su bufón. Quizá sea esta la misma canción que abrió un sendero a través del triste corazón de Ruth cuando, aquejada de nostalgia, su sollozo alzó en tierra extraña. La misma canción que a menudo me abre mágicos umbrales entre el oleaje espumoso de peligrosos mares, abandonándome en tierras desoladas.
Forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my sole self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades, past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now it is buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep?
Abandonado. La misma palabra es como una campana que dobla llamándome de vuelta a mi ser descorazonado. Adiós. La fantasía no puede engañar tanto como por lo que es celebrada duende farsante. Adiós, adiós. Tu himno quejumbroso se desvanece más allá de los vecinos prados, cruzando el arroyo pausado, ascendiendo la ladera, y ya está enterrado profundamente en los claros de los valles cercanos. ¿Fue acaso una visión o el sueño de un momento de desvelo? La música ha huido. Estoy de espíritu, o ya dormí. Thank you very much. Okay, it's been very, very emotional because to read the poem in the house where he lived is. So I need a break.